29,000 feet. In Everest's death zone, oxygen levels were 30% and every breath was agony. But Captain Jess Rodriguez had no choice but to stop the enemy sniper. The crisis began at 4:15 a.m. Nepal Standard Time on May 12, 2024, when satellite intelligence detected an unprecedented terrorist operation establishing a sniper position near Mount Everest summit. Captain Jessica Rodriguez, a 28-year-old Special Forces operative with the Army's elite mountain warfare unit, was conducting routine high-altitude training at base camp when the emergency briefing changed everything. Jess had spent 6 years preparing for moments like this. Her childhood in Colorado's Rocky Mountains had given her an early appreciation for high-altitude environments, but her military career had transformed that natural affinity into professional expertise. After graduating from West Point with degrees in geology and tactical operations, she had volunteered for the most challenging assignments the Army could offer. Which city in the world are you watching this video from today? The Mountain Warfare Unit recruited only the most physically and mentally capable soldiers, subjecting candidates to training programs that pushed human endurance beyond normal limits. Jess had survived selection courses in Alaska's Denali National Park, where temperatures dropped to -60 degrees, and candidates learned to function effectively despite environmental conditions that could kill within hours. Her specialized education included advanced courses in high-altitude physiology, where she learned how the human body adapted to reduced oxygen levels and extreme cold. The training covered everything from proper breathing techniques to recognizing early symptoms of cerebral edema, the brain swelling that could prove fatal above 26. Jess's operational experience had taken her to the world's most challenging mountain ranges. She had conducted reconnaissance missions in the Hindu Kush, where Taliban fighters used high-altitude positions to avoid conventional military forces. Her success in those operations had established her reputation as one of the Army's most capable mountain warfare specialists. The Andes missions had been particularly demanding, requiring her to operate at altitudes above 20,000 feet while carrying full combat equipment. She had learned to move efficiently in thin air while maintaining the alertness necessary for tactical decision-making under conditions that exhausted most soldiers within hours. Her weapons training included specialized instruction in high-altitude marksmanship, where reduced air density and extreme temperatures affected bullet trajectory and weapon performance. She had practiced shooting at ranges above 15,000 feet, learning to compensate for atmospheric conditions that could cause even experienced marksmen to miss their targets. The terrorist leader known as the Ghost had established a sniper position at 29,000 feet, using the mountain's extreme altitude as protection against conventional military response. Intelligence reports indicated that his target was a peace summit scheduled to occur in the valley below, where world leaders would gather within range of long-distance sniper fire. The Ghost background remained largely classified, but intelligence analysts believed he was a former military sniper with extensive combat experience in mountainous regions. His ability to operate effectively at extreme altitude suggested training and physiological adaptations that few people possessed. The Peace Summit included heads of state from 12 nations attempting to resolve conflicts that had destabilized South Asia for decades. The diplomatic gathering represented years of careful negotiation and preparation, with agreements that could affect millions of lives hanging in the balance. Security planners had considered various threats to the summit, but the possibility of a sniper attack from Everest summit had seemed too extreme to warrant serious preparation. The physical challenges of operating at such altitude were believed to make tactical operations impossible for all but the most exceptional individuals. The terrorists' timing coincided with optimal climbing conditions that provided a narrow window of opportunity for both ascent and tactical operations. Weather forecasts indicated that conditions would deteriorate rapidly after the brief period of relative stability that the Ghost had chosen for his operation. Jess's mission briefing occurred in a secure facility at Tribhuvan International Airport in Kathmandu, where military intelligence officers outlined the threat assessment and tactical challenges. The briefing included medical experts who explained the physiological dangers of operating in the death zone above 20. The death zone earned its name because human beings could not survive indefinitely at such altitude, even with supplemental oxygen. The human body began shutting down non-essential functions within hours of exposure to such extreme conditions, with death following inevitably if descent didn't occur quickly. Previous military operations at extreme altitude had been limited to brief reconnaissance missions or emergency rescues that lasted only hours. No one had ever attempted sustained tactical operations at 29,000 feet, where the margin for error was essentially zero and equipment failures could prove immediately fatal. The sniper position's elevation provided tactical advantages that made conventional airstrikes impossible due to helicopter altitude limitations and unpredictable weather conditions. Military helicopters could not operate effectively above 20,000 feet, and the extreme winds at higher altitudes made precision flying impossible. Fixed-wing aircraft could reach the necessary altitude, but achieving the precision required to eliminate a single target without causing massive avalanches was beyond current technology. Bombing runs at such altitude would risk catastrophic snowslides that could devastate populated areas in the valley below. Weather analysis revealed that conditions above 28,000 feet remained unpredictable, even during the best climbing seasons. Sudden storms could create whiteout conditions with zero visibility, while jet stream winds could exceed 200 miles per hour without warning. Equipment preparation required specialized gear designed for extreme altitude operations while maintaining the mobility necessary for tactical movement. Every piece of equipment had to be carefully selected and tested to ensure reliable performance at temperatures below -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Jess's oxygen system included backup bottles and regulators designed for military operations rather than civilian climbing. The equipment was lighter than commercial systems but provided more precise flow control that would be essential for maintaining alertness during tactical operations. Her weapon was a modified M24 sniper weapon system that had been specially prepared for extreme cold operation. The rifle's lubricants were replaced with compounds that remained fluid at sub-zero temperatures, while the scope was equipped with heating elements to prevent condensation that could obscure visibility. Cold weather clothing included multiple insulation layers that could be adjusted based on activity level and environmental conditions. The outer shell was designed to break wind while allowing moisture vapor to escape, preventing the accumulation of perspiration that could freeze and create hypothermia risks. Communication equipment included satellite radios with encryption capabilities that would allow coordination with support teams throughout the operation. Backup batteries were essential because electronic equipment drained power rapidly in extreme cold conditions. Navigation gear included GPS units with detailed topographic maps of the Everest region, but Jess also carried traditional compass and altimeter equipment as backups. Electronic systems could fail in extreme conditions, making mechanical navigation tools essential for safety. Emergency medical supplies included medications for altitude sickness, hypothermia treatment, and pain management that might be necessary during extended operations. Weight limitations meant that medical equipment had to be carefully prioritized based on likely needs and effectiveness. The ascent began at 2 a.m. from advanced base camp at 21,300 feet, following established climbing routes through the Khumbu icefall. The early start was necessary to reach higher altitudes before afternoon weather patterns typically brought increased wind and cloud cover. The Khumbu icefall presented immediate hazards as Jess navigated through a maze of crevasses and unstable ice formations that could collapse without warning. Previous climbing expeditions had established fixed ropes and aluminum ladders to facilitate passage, but the routes required constant attention to avoid falls that could prove fatal. Moving through the icefall demanded careful timing because the glacial ice moved continuously, creating new crevasses while closing others. The formations were most stable during early morning hours, when cold temperatures provided maximum structural integrity. Above the icefall, the route continued across the western Siobim, a glacial valley that provided relatively flat terrain, but exposed climbers to avalanche risks from surrounding peaks. The snow surface could be deceptively unstable, concealing crevasses that were impossible to detect visually. Weather conditions during the early ascent remained favorable, with light winds and clear visibility that allowed rapid progress through technical terrain. However, Jess monitored atmospheric pressure readings that indicated potential weather changes that could affect conditions higher on the mountain. The ascent of the Loche face required technical ice climbing skills as Jess used fixed ropes and ice axes to climb nearly vertical sections of glacial ice. The physical demands were enormous, but she maintained steady progress while monitoring her oxygen consumption and heart rate. At 24,000 feet, Jess established her first rest stop at Camp 3, where she checked equipment and consumed high-energy food designed for extreme altitude conditions. The brief rest period allowed her to assess her physical condition and make any necessary adjustments to her ascent plan. Climbing above 24,000 feet required careful pace management to prevent altitude sickness while maintaining the speed necessary to reach the target area within the operational time window. Jess used breathing techniques learned during high-altitude training to maximize oxygen efficiency while conserving physical energy. The physiological effects of extreme altitude became more pronounced as Jess climbed higher. Her heart rate increased to maintain oxygen delivery to vital organs, while her breathing became deeper and more frequent to extract maximum oxygen from the thin air. Appetite suppression was a normal response to extreme altitude, but Jess forced herself to consume calories regularly to maintain energy levels. Dehydration was also a constant concern because the dry air at high altitude caused rapid moisture loss through breathing. Mental effects of altitude included difficulty concentrating and reduced decision-making capacity that could prove dangerous during tactical operations. Jess had trained extensively to recognize these symptoms and compensate for their effects on operational performance. The route above Camp 3 followed a narrow ridge where exposure to wind and weather became severe. Jess clipped into fixed ropes that previous expeditions had installed, but she remained aware that these safety systems might fail under extreme conditions. Navigation became more challenging as terrain features became obscured by snow and cloud cover. GPS systems provided basic positioning information, but Jess relied heavily on topographic knowledge and compass bearings to maintain proper route finding. Weather monitoring indicated increasing wind speeds that would make climbing dangerous above 27,000 feet. However, the tactical situation required Jess to continue ascending despite marginal conditions that would normally prompt descent to safer altitudes. At 26,000 feet, Jess entered the death zone where human survival became tenuous even with supplemental oxygen. Her body began prioritizing vital organ function while reducing blood flow to extremities, creating hypothermia and frostbite risks that required constant attention. The psychological challenge of operating in the death zone was as demanding as the physical effects. Knowing that survival time was limited created stress that could affect decision-making and tactical performance when precision was most critical. Equipment performance became increasingly problematic as temperatures dropped below -30 degrees Fahrenheit. Metal components became brittle, while electronic devices drained batteries rapidly, requiring careful power management to ensure critical systems remained functional. Breathing became labored despite supplemental oxygen as Jess's respiratory system worked harder to extract sufficient oxygen for cellular function. Each breath required conscious effort, making it difficult to maintain the breathing control necessary for precision shooting. At 27,000 feet, Jess encountered her first serious equipment malfunction when one of her backup oxygen regulators began malfunctioning due to ice formation in the valve mechanism. She switched to her primary system while working to clear the blockage using techniques learned during cold weather training. The technical climbing above 27,000 feet required maximum physical effort while fighting the effects of oxygen deprivation on muscle function and coordination. Each movement had to be planned carefully because mistakes at such altitude could prove immediately fatal. Wind conditions deteriorated as Jess climbed above 28,000 feet, with gusts exceeding 80 miles per hour that threatened to blow her off the narrow ridges that led toward the summit area. She timed her movements to coincide with brief lulls in wind activity. Visibility decreased as cloud cover moved in from the west, reducing visual range to less than 100 feet in some areas. Jess relied on compass bearings and altimeter readings to maintain proper navigation toward the target coordinates. The final approach to 29,000 feet required rock climbing techniques on exposed cliff faces where hand and footholds were covered with verglas, a thin coating of ice that made climbing extremely treacherous. Each movement required multiple points of contact to ensure security. Physical exhaustion became a significant factor as Jess's body struggled to function effectively in the death zone. Muscle weakness and reduced coordination made every movement more difficult while increasing the risk of falls or equipment failures. At 500 feet, Jess established visual contact with the ghost sniper position. Through her binoculars, the terrorist had constructed a sophisticated hide using natural rock formations and camouflage materials that provided excellent concealment and protection from the elements. The sniper's equipment included high-powered optics and a heavy barrel rifle designed for extreme long-range shooting. Intelligence analysis suggested that the Ghost possessed the capability to engage targets at ranges exceeding 3 miles under optimal conditions. Tactical assessment of the situation revealed that the Ghost had chosen his position carefully, with multiple escape routes and defensive advantages that would make direct assault extremely dangerous. His elevated position provided superior observation and fields of fire. The approach to within effective shooting range required Jess to traverse exposed terrain where detection was likely. However, the extreme altitude and weather conditions would affect the Ghost's alertness and reaction time just as they were affecting her own performance. Wind measurement using a portable anemometer indicated gusts exceeding 60 miles per hour with frequent direction changes that would significantly affect bullet trajectory. Timing any engagement would require waiting for brief periods of reduced wind activity. Temperature readings showed conditions of -45 degrees Fahrenheit that affected both human performance and equipment reliability. Weapon systems required careful maintenance to prevent malfunctions that could prove fatal during tactical operations. The final stalking approach required Jess to move across a narrow ridge system where any mistake could result in fatal falls. The terrain offered minimal concealment, making detection likely once she moved within 200 meters of the target position. At 29,000 feet, every movement required maximum effort as Jess fought against oxygen deprivation, extreme cold, and physical exhaustion that threatened her ability to maintain tactical effectiveness. Her specialized training was being tested to its absolute limits. The engagement began when the Ghost detected movement and began repositioning his weapon toward Jess's location. The tactical situation demanded immediate action despite suboptimal conditions that would challenge even the most experienced marksman. Weapon deployment required Jess to establish a stable shooting position on uneven terrain while fighting altitude-induced tremors and disorientation. Her breathing technique became critical for steadying her aim while managing oxygen consumption. The range to target was approximately 18 meters across the narrow ridge where the Ghost had established his position. At 29,000 feet, even this relatively short distance presented ballistic challenges due to reduced air density and extreme temperature effects. Wind estimation required Jess to observe snow and ice particles to determine current conditions and predict their effects on bullet trajectory. The unpredictable gusts made precise windage calculations extremely difficult. The shot was taken during a brief lull in wind activity as Jess compensated for the reduced air density and temperature effects that would influence bullet performance. Her specialized training in high-altitude marksmanship provided the expertise necessary for success under impossible conditions. Target acquisition through her rifle scope revealed the Ghost beginning to aim toward the valley below where the peace summit was scheduled to begin within hours. The timing was critical because any delay could allow the terrorist to complete his assassination mission. The bullet's flight time at such altitude was affected by the reduced air density, requiring Jess to lead her target differently than she would at sea level. Her understanding of high-altitude ballistics was essential for making the necessary adjustments. The engagement concluded successfully as Jess's shot eliminated the terrorist's threat. However, confirmation of target neutralization required her to maintain her position long enough to verify that the Ghost was no longer capable of completing his mission. The immediate aftermath of the engagement required Jess to secure the area and gather intelligence materials from the Ghost's position. This process was complicated by the extreme altitude and deteriorating weather conditions that made extended operations dangerous. Documentation of the terrorist's equipment and materials provided valuable intelligence about his capabilities and potential accomplices. The information would be essential for preventing similar attacks and understanding the broader terrorist network. Descent from 29,000 feet presented new challenges as physical exhaustion and oxygen depletion made climbing dangerous even with gravity assistance. Jess had to maintain concentration and coordination during technical climbing sections that could prove fatal if attempted carelessly. The psychological relief of mission completion had to be balanced against the continued dangers of descent through the death zone. Jess maintained tactical alertness while managing her physical condition and equipment during the dangerous return journey. Weather conditions continued deteriorating during the descent as afternoon storms brought increased wind and reduced visibility. The changing conditions made navigation more difficult while increasing avalanche risks on steep slopes. At 28,000 feet during descent, Jess encountered a section where fixed ropes had been damaged by weather, requiring her to improvise alternative anchor points using her own climbing equipment. The technical challenges demanded skills and energy she could barely manage in her exhausted condition. Emergency protocols required Jess to maintain radio contact with support teams during descent, but communication equipment was affected by extreme cold and altitude. She used backup systems while monitoring battery levels that were draining rapidly. The descent through the death zone tested Jess's endurance as much as the ascent had challenged her tactical skills. Each step required careful placement while fighting the effects of altitude and exhaustion that could cause fatal mistakes. At 26,000 feet, Jess reached the relative safety of thicker atmosphere, but still faced technical climbing challenges that required full attention. The relief of leaving the death zone was offset by continued dangers that demanded vigilance. Weather conditions improved slightly as Jess descended below 25,000 feet, but afternoon wind patterns created new hazards, including increased avalanche activity on exposed slopes. She modified her descent route to avoid areas of obvious instability. The reunion with support teams at base camp marked the successful completion of the world's highest altitude combat mission. Medical personnel immediately began assessment and treatment for altitude-related injuries and exhaustion that were inevitable after such extreme operations. Physical examination revealed the toll of operating at extreme altitude, including dehydration, muscle deterioration, minor frostbite, and early symptoms of high-altitude cerebral edema. However, Jess had avoided life-threatening complications through careful self-monitoring and proper equipment use. The intelligence materials recovered from the Ghost's position revealed sophisticated planning and equipment that indicated significant resources behind the terrorist operation. Analysis of his communication equipment led to the identification of accomplices and prevention of additional attacks. International response to the prevented assassination focused on enhanced security measures for diplomatic events while maintaining operational security about the specific military action that had eliminated the threat. The peace summit continued with additional protective measures. The successful Everest operation established new precedents for special operations in extreme environments, while providing valuable data for future high-altitude tactical missions. Jess's techniques and equipment modifications became standard training material for mountain warfare specialists. Medical research based on Jess's physiological data during the operation advanced understanding of human performance limits at extreme altitude. Her experience provided insights that improved training methods and equipment design for high-altitude operations. The peace agreements achieved during the summit that Jess's mission had protected resulted in significant reductions in regional conflicts. Her actions had prevented assassinations that could have destabilized international relations and caused renewed warfare affecting millions of people. Military historians recognize the Everest sniper elimination as a watershed moment in special operations capabilities. The mission demonstrated that properly trained and equipped personnel could conduct tactical operations under conditions previously considered impossible for human survival. The techniques and equipment innovations developed for the Everest operation influenced mountain warfare doctrine and training programs worldwide. Jess's experience became the foundation for advanced high-altitude tactical training that expanded special operations capabilities. Years later, the classified details of the operation remained secret, but its influence on military doctrine and training continued. The mission had proven that human determination and specialized training could overcome even the most extreme environmental challenges when lives depended on success. Captain Jessica Rodriguez had climbed into the death zone and emerged victorious, establishing herself as one of the most accomplished mountain warfare specialists in military history. Her mission at 29,000 feet had saved lives while demonstrating the ultimate limits of human tactical capabilities under impossible conditions.